When you think of Bathsheba, what are some words that you've heard that are used to describe her? I've heard words like seductive, cunning, manipulative, adulterous. Timothy Beal, in his book, The Rise and Fall of the Bible, points out that there's been an ongoing problem with biblical translations and interpretations when it comes to women. He says that there are long-standing gender stereotypes and anxieties about women's sexuality. So today I want to look at the story of Bathsheba, which is found in 2 Samuel chapters 11 and 12. And also we'll take a look briefly at Psalm 51, which is a psalm that we are told that David wrote after this incident with Bathsheba. So I'm going to be looking at this from a feminist lens. And to give you a little bit of information about what that means, feminism scholarship and religious-related studies really picked up in the 1970s. And it mainly included the work of white women, although not all white women scholars identify as feminists. But let me give you a couple definitions that some of those women have used to explain feminist scholarship. Hebrew Bible scholar Phyllis Tribble said that by a feminist lens, she doesn't mean a narrow focus upon women, but rather a critique in light of misogyny. Dr. Corinne Carvalho, who's also a Hebrew biblical scholar, says that feminist scholarship challenges the patriarchal ideology that both produced the text and authorized the interpretations. And so we're asking, what can we glean from the scriptures when we acknowledge the misogyny and patriarchy woven into the fabric of religious studies? I also want to mention that in the late 1980s, early 1990s, we finally began to see the scholarly work of Black women in religious studies-related fields. So in addition to those critiques of misogyny and patriarchy in the scriptures, these women are also looking at the ways that those things intersect with race and ethnicity and class in our reading of and understanding of scripture. And so some of these women, but not all, describe themselves as Black feminists or sometimes womanists. I wish I had more time to go in depth on this topic, but I want to get to Bathsheba. So if you want to read more about feminism, womanism, Black feminism in biblical interpretation, I recommend that you check out Nyasha Jr.'s book called An Introduction to Womanist Biblical Interpretation. But what I want to point out is the women that I am quoting today and borrowing from today have advanced degrees, mostly doctoral degrees, in religious study-related fields. They're professors. They aren't people with a red pen who decided to change or mark out or erase scripture because they didn't like what it said. They take their scholarly work seriously. But because they are coming at scripture from a different vantage point than the people who have mostly had access to education and to the ancient texts for most of time, men are the people who've had that access. These women, now that they are coming in, are seeing some nuances that have gotten missed. They're asking some questions that haven't gotten asked in the past, and they're learning new things and bringing new things to light. And so these women scholars are helping us to understand Bathsheba's story more accurately, and that leads to helping us glean more information from this rich text. I'm using a lot of work today from Dr. Wilda Gafney, who describes herself sometimes as a Black feminist, sometimes as a womanist. And she's written many books, but the book I'm using a lot today is called A Women's Lectionary for the Whole Church. And as a feminist, I look at work from other people. Not all of them are feminists, but I bring their work into consideration as I'm looking through my lens. So I want to challenge 3 particular ideas about Bathsheba that I think are wrong. They've been places where she's been misunderstood, and we want to redeem her name and bring some new understanding to her story. So the first wrong idea, I think, is that this idea that she was trying to seduce David. Yes, he saw her bathing, but why did he see her bathing? Well, she was on her rooftop bathing. But Dr. Gafney says it wasn't unusual in that culture for rooftops to form an extra room in an Israelite person's house. So Bathsheba was simply bathing at her house. David saw something he shouldn't have seen, and instead of turning away, he kept looking. And not only did he do that, he called other people to come and look, so that they could help him figure out who she was. There was a lot of gawking. There was voyeurism. Bathsheba was doing nothing wrong. She wasn't trying to seduce him. But David was wrong in the way he handled the thing that he saw. Not only was she not trying to seduce him, but we don't even have evidence that this interaction that occurred between them was consensual. A theologian named Elizabeth Hinton-Hasty said that when the scripture says the words David lay with her, it doesn't really convey the significance of a king's authority and the violence that was perpetrated against Bathsheba. Bathsheba clearly had no choice but to do as she was told. When the king tells you to do something, you do it. And you don't fight it because things may even get worse for you. Bathsheba did what she was told. She was not consensual. This was not consensual. Also, we want to look for a moment at specifically 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 4, because this is a really significant verse. The New International Version and the Holman Christian Standard Bible interpret chapter 11, verse 4 in 2 Samuel very similarly. Here's what the NIV says. Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him and he slept with her. Then in parentheses, it says, now she was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanliness. End parentheses. Then she went back home. It feels like a weird sentence, doesn't it? David sent messengers to get her. She came to him. He slept with her. By the way, she was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanness. Then she went back home. What does purifying herself in this ritual that was demanded by her religion that had to happen after her period, what did that purification have to do with the rest of the story? Why did they put it there? Well, Dr. Gafney suggests that a better translation that frankly makes more sense is this. She says this way, and this is a translation. And David sent messengers, and he took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. Then she purified herself after her defilement and returned to her house. Dr. Gafney says there were two cleansings. There was the bath that David saw Bathsheba taking, and then after he violated her, she bathed again. She purified herself after her defilement. This is an indicator that this was not consensual. She was defiled. If it's not consensual, then it's forced. And if it's forced, then it's rape. Dr. Gafney describes that whole incident as a violation of Bathsheba's body. She uses words like abduction, rape, and forced impregnation. And if that's the case, then my third point is this was not adultery. It has been too often described as such by male scholars and pastors and other people who talk about these scriptures in a way that I think is rather irresponsible. I looked at the New International Version, the Holman Christian Standard Bible, and the New Revised Standard Version. And I compared some of those headings. You know, the headings that go above the scripture and tell you what the story is about? And so I looked in 2 Samuel, verse 11, or chapter 11. And then I also looked at Psalm 51, which is the confession that David wrote after this incident. In both cases, each of those three translations use the word adultery, either in 2 Samuel 11 or in Psalm 51, or in one case, both places. Editors have made a choice to call this adultery, to tell us that this is adultery, to read that into the text when there's nothing in the text that suggests that. Bathsheba was not seductive. This encounter was not consensual, and she did not commit adultery. Adultery implies that two people are consenting. They're breaking their marriage vows when they have relations with each other. She did not consent. This was not adulterous. Why talk about all this? Well, first of all, I think it's great to redeem Bathsheba's name. She's gotten a really bad rap, and I think it's good to be able to look at her story more carefully and recognize the harms of which she suffered. Too often, I have heard this sermon turn into, hey, David did a really bad thing. Somebody called him out, God forgave him, and then he was remembered with a really strong legacy as a great king. And sometimes then I hear the parallel of if you do something bad, you can confess and God will forgive you, and you can go on and do really great things. And that may be true, but it's so reductive. I think this could also be considered to be a cautionary tale, that when we do one evil thing, sometimes we end up doing another evil thing to cover it up. And so don't do what David did. Don't leave another Uriah or Bathsheba in your wake. I think another lesson that we can glean from this when we're honest about what happened with Bathsheba is that we are called to be courageous like the prophet Nathan and to speak out against injustice, to confront wrongdoers. Dr. Gafney says that this needs to be done even in the church. She says the ethical failures highlighted in these lessons continue, that the church has a responsibility to hear the victimized, which has not been the experience of most women or others abused by clergy. She said the church needs justice in its own house and in the world without. And building on that, I would say that if we can't have justice in our own house, that the church is finding itself in this place where there is not justice. And if we are not doing that, how can we expect that our leaders on the outside will be decent and good and moral? In this election year, I think that's a particularly important question. And Bathsheba's story reminds us that we have a great responsibility to others, to treat them with dignity and goodness and kindness, to act morally, and to hold our leaders to the same standards.